Hello, my name's Kevin, this is Dirty 20 Gaming, and this week I'm going to introduce you to a couple of my characters. I realized I spent weeks and weeks telling you how I built characters and never actually showed you any of them. So it's time to fix that. Today I'm going to introduce two of them to you. The first one is a very typical Kevin sort of character, specifically designed to explore two things, one mechanical and one sort of story driven. The second one is built specifically for an Adventurers League game, and as such, he is designed much more as a beast who can deliver and take a tremendous amount of damage. But we'll get to him in a minute. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Keybane Brikoki, the half-elf mastermind rogue. Q is probably one of the unroguiest rogues you've ever seen. The first thing you'll probably notice is that his dexterity is actually his third highest stat. But he's a mastermind rogue, so it made sense to me when I built him that he would have high charisma and high intelligence. Those are the key things for his success. He's also got the courtier background, which I chose because I decided he had been a diplomat in a previous life before the situation changed and he was forced to become an adventurer. Get to that in a minute. But because of that, and because of that background and because of those skills, it made sense when it came time to choose his skills. If you look over here, I chose all the social skills. So his best talents are insight, deception, and persuasion, and intimidation. The big four. Not particularly roguey skills, normally speaking. But if you also notice, if we pan down a little bit here, down in the tools department, he does not own thieves' tools. And he's a rogue, he has proficiency with them, there was no choice, but he doesn't actually own a set. And if you look slightly higher here, he is not proficient in stealth. I'll say that again, my rogue is not proficient in stealth. In fact, he's the opposite of stealthy. He is a flashy dresser. He wears blue brocade suits with brown and black leather trim. He has his own cologne. It's a musk with citrus. He's a great talker and a master manipulator. He is tactical on the battlefield. He has the ability, if I just zip down here, Master of Tactics, which allows him to use his bonus action to use the help action to assist one of his teammates, but he can do that from 30 feet away from the target, so I don't have to put him in immediate danger for him to be helpful in combat. So while he himself doesn't deliver a huge amount of damage, even though he's got sneak attack, he's much more of a buff the other guy character than he is to do the damage himself character. Again, not particularly roguish. There is one more thing down here. I thought as a diplomat, if you were going to have a single magical item, it would absolutely, positively be a ring of truth telling. So don't lie to Q. It's not going to work. When it came to deciding his attitude, deciding who he was and how he approached the world, I was kind of stuck for a while until I remembered a old British comedy called Jeeves and Wooster. It's based on the stories by the author P.G. Wodehouse, and if you've never seen it before, I strongly suggest you watch at least an episode or two. If you see Jeeves, crank that up to 11, and that's Q. For those of you that haven't seen it, he's the kind of person that uses one as a pronoun. He says, one will be outside waiting for one. He also is a master at having great ideas and convincing the people that he works for that they had the great idea. He's very, very, very good at being the power behind the throne. So his original inspiration, that's not where it started. His original inspiration was twofold. One, I wanted to, on a purely mechanical level, I wanted to figure out how many skills I could get above +5. You can see that kind of fell by the wayside over time. There are not that many over 5, but that was one of the original inspirations, was how many skills can I get above +5? The other half of the inspiration was trying to build a rogue I liked. Oh, rogues. Slimy, back alley dwelling, steal your stuff rather than look you in the face. I just have a really hard time playing rogues. I don't like them. So I challenged myself to build one that I did like. These two inspirations together allowed me to do some interesting things. It allowed me to play a subclass that I think rarely gets played. I don't know about you, but I very rarely see mastermind rogues in my games. It also meant I got to play and create a charming rogue, which is something that you don't get to see very often. It's kind of a stereotype in the old movies, but you just don't see it as a character very often. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. When it came to fleshing Q out, most of it was done for me. I had already decided he was a diplomat, so that was in his past. I also decided that he had to run from royalty to royalty because he had a habit of sleeping with princes. The last one he slept with was a major deal because Prince in question announced his never-ending love for Q in open court. And to say it went poorly would be an understatement. As a result of this, Q fled at high speed, only later to receive from the prince in question the signet ring that he wore and a suicide note. So for Q at the time, this was just another fling, just another notch in the bedpost, just another prince to brag about bedding. But since he's received the letter and the ring, unbeknownst to him, he is falling in love with a dead man. So I get to explore that. Only one thing left to talk about for Q, and that's his story arc. And for him, it's really, really simple. Q has to learn how to care. As soon as he does, and as soon as he focuses his energies on helping others instead of helping himself, he's not going to have a choice. He's going to accidentally save the world. So that's Q. And I think you can probably tell from the tone of my voice as I talk about him that I really like Q. He's one of my favorite characters. This next one is a little different. This is Fibblestib Bafflestone, the Sverfneblin, Deep Gnome. And for those of you that think I practiced that sentence for half an hour before I started this, you are correct. First thing you're going to notice with him, Deep Gnome Monk, level 3. So these numbers and statistics are much lower than they were for Q. Q was level 8. Fib is only at level 3, so those numbers are lower. They're also statistically lower for another reason, and that is because Fib is built around a standard array. Player's Handbook, character creation. If you're not going to roll for stats, you use the standard array. 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8 are the numbers you use for your stats. So you can see looking at Fib that I used the stats traditionally this time. His best two stats are dexterity and wisdom. He's a monk. That's what you're supposed to do. As far as his background went, there was only one that makes sense. He's a deep gnome. He's from the Underdark, so Far Traveler was the only background that made sense. There were other ones that would have gotten me more useful skills, sure. But if you've watched any of my videos, you know I like my character decisions to make sense. But this is where he started looking regular. He started looking normal. He started looking like every other monk in the world, so I couldn't stand that, and I had to change it. So the first thing I did was I picked a subclass that I had not played before, which is saying something, because I play a lot of monks. My melee characters tend to be monks. But I had never done a Way of the Long Death monk before. They're fascinated with death, which from a monk's point of view was very interesting to me. The other thing is they have a very useful benefit if you are playing to have a character survive, which this one is. As I said, it's for an Adventurers League game. At level 3, Way of the Long Death monks gain an ability, which means that every time they knock an opponent unconscious in melee combat, they themselves gain temporary hit points equal to their wisdom modifier plus their monk level. So at level 3, every time I knock somebody out, I gain 5 temporary hit points, which is a lot for level 3. But when you add to that the fact that the adventure that we're going to be on takes place in one in-game day, in other words, no chance for a long rest, these hit points are going to be the difference between surviving and not surviving this adventure. So I looked at that and I thought, this is good. And then I thought, this is really overpowered. So I couldn't help myself. I had to make up for that somehow. And the way I did that was decided that Fib doesn't use weapons. All unarmed attacks, which means all of his attacks are 1d4 damage based. If he used a sword, one of them could have been 1d6, but no, I can't maximize him that much. The next thing I did was decided that in spite of the fact that he's 3 feet 1 inches tall, I decided Fib is a grappler of sorts. And as such, he needed both the athletics and acrobatics skills. So he can put you in a grapple and he can get out of your grapple. I started building on that and I thought, this is interesting. This is a different kind of monk. So I started pushing that, see how different. And what I decided was, in the end, our friend Fib is 3 feet 1 inches tall, dark gnome, deep gnome, 80 pounds, and he is a sumo wrestler. And let that sink in for a second. A 3 foot 1 inch tall sumo wrestler. Now that is a non-traditional monk. He is complete even to the point of having the top knot and the mawashi, which is the typical sumo garb. When it came to fleshing him out, there's really not much to do. First of all, because it's for a one-shot, and I'm not going to spend 6 hours building a backstory for a character if that backstory is never going to come out. The other thing is this is a one-shot and Adventurers League. It's mostly going to be combat-focused. This is going to be about thumping the hell out of stuff for a couple of hours and hopefully surviving. So I didn't need a lot of backstory. So what I decided basically is he's a little bit of a bully. He's used to throwing his not inconsiderable weight around and getting his way. And then to challenge myself, I decided that he's going to have a nasty, hard-to-understand dialect. I chose East Coast Canadian based on some of the dialects in the Newfoundland and Labrador area. This is going to make it challenging for the other players in the game to understand what he's saying. It's also going to be a personal challenge to me to try and get that dialect right and accurate. So that's just something that I did on the side to make my personal day more challenging. One of the things with this Way of the Long Death monk, I had to figure out how to get him into the organization known as the Harpers, because it wasn't our choice. Our group is part of the Harpers. So as such, I had to figure out a way to get him in there. And what I figured out is because he's fascinated with death, and because the Harpers have, as an organization, died and been resurrected any number of times, he's studying them to see if there's any sort of philosophical approach that they take which might allow him to cross that gap between an organization coming back and living beings coming back. And that's all the backstory he needs. I was looking at it and I thought, I want a little more. So I decided that even though he is a sumo wrestler, albeit a 3 foot 1 inch tall sumo wrestler, I decided he flows when he moves. It's like watching water move from one corner of a room to another, or like watching a cat flow through a shadow. There's absolutely no mechanical difference to the game whatsoever, but it's going to make him more memorable. And then one final thing, Adventurers League allows your character to have a trinket, a useless little item that they carry with them. And so I decided that our friend Fib has an obsidian monocle, which he wears when he's trying to look cool. Kind of like half a pair of aviator sunglasses. And with that, Thank you so much for listening while I introduced you to Fib and Q. And as always, until next time, game creatively. Bye.